And welcome back to the show. Robin Hood is the New York City's largest poverty-fighting philanthropic organization. Now, recently, they've had some applications that have opened up for its grant readiness and insights training, with this year's cohort focusing on organizations serving children as well as youth. Joining me now, we have the managing director of Robin Hood Foundation, Suzi Epstein. And Suzi, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. So for Robin Hood, obviously an opportunity for many people to actually branch out and to be able to better serve the community. So as you have this grant readiness training that's going on, talk to us about the cohort and what's happening right now.
I'll start by going backwards and saying that we launched the GRIT program, Grant Readiness, Insights and Training, 7 years ago to provide nonprofit leaders of early middle stage organizations with the tools that they need to realize greater financial flexibility and secure more corporate and philanthropic support to drive them to greater independence. What we have seen, since Robin Hood's inception 35 years ago, is that there are many small and middle-sized not-for-profits that have very committed staff and a very intriguing and solid program model, but they haven't been especially successful in getting foundation money. And when an organization is overly reliant on just one source of money, whether that's government contracts or just board members and their friends, they're often not as able to be nimble or innovative or visible even. So being too reliant on only one funding source is something that can be extremely limiting for an organization. And we're trying to help groups diversify their funding streams so that they, number one, can have a little bit for a rainy day, and number two, really try to pilot new programs and services with more alacrity and more imagination.
Yeah. Walk me through a little bit for an organization, because we know that the big chains or bigger organizations that have bigger staff, they have the ability to have grant writers and things of that nature. But if you don't have the luxury of having that kind of capacity, it sometimes can be a very uphill battle, correct?
It can be, although knowing the tricks of the trade will get you a very long way. So sometimes it's not about the numbers of people on the staff, but really the mastery of certain tools and the ability to make a compelling and persuasive argument and to be able to talk convincingly about your program's results, your program's costs, your program's excellent governance, your staff commitment and satisfaction, and consumers and constituents talking about the way they've been treated and the strides that they've made. And this is not so much about having a rich and robust staff as really knowing what you have to present to evidence-based funders who are looking for that particular angle when they make decisions about investments.
So give us a little bit about what the training will actually feature. You gave me a little bit of an overview, but for the people who actually participate, what will they actually be able to achieve?
We did a survey of groups who participated in GRIT over the first 6 years of the program, and of the 72 groups who participated, about 2/3 of them raised additional money on an average of $400,000 within 2 years. Many of them also added members to their board of directors or made tweaks in their financial presentations. Maybe they changed auditors or brought in a new chief fiscal officer. Many of them made improvements to their evaluation so that they could talk much more concretely and convincingly about outcomes as well as process and implementation. I will say this, the GRIT program is a series of a dozen workshops. It's 30 hours of content, which this year we are running in a hybrid model, both remotely and in person. We're hoping to have 2 or 3 in-person meetings. We offer a range of topics, each of which gets a fairly robust amount of time. And we also offer one-on-one sessions with the professionals who lead our workshops, so that groups that want some individual attention and, to roll up their sleeves and talk to one of the consultants independently have an opportunity to do that at the conclusion of the workshops for several weeks afterwards.
Yeah. Can you give me a little insight into the grant process right now? Down through the years, we know that, the state has budget cuts and the city's dealing with budget cuts, and opportunities for funding for organizations have really drastically been cut. I would imagine that means there's more people coming into the pool. Talk to us about what you're seeing in this whole grant atmosphere as of right now. Have things gotten better in terms of opportunities, or are things, a little tight right now?
That's a great question, and I'm going to say both.
Okay.
I do think that with public cuts in terms of resources, the competition for corporate and philanthropic money is more intense, and it is one reason that not-for-profits throughout New York City and across the country, quite frankly, need to be effective fundraisers. That said, I also think there is huge awareness and drive on the part of many foundations, including Robin Hood, to better penetrate small and hidden communities, to look at new and emerging leaders, to fund newer groups that are not centuries old, that are piloting innovative models. And so there's an explosion of opportunity, I think, for smaller organizations to secure private funding. And that's one reason actually that we developed the GRIT initiative.
Yeah. So give me a little bit of insight to who's eligible. How are applicants actually eligible for this?
We are looking at a sweet spot of groups whose budgets are between $500,000 and $10 million. We're looking at organizations that are not early stage. We're not looking at organizations who've existed for 1 or 2 years that may just have, a founder and a staff person, because we actually do want to train a team through GRIT. So we're looking at groups who have at least 3 years of operations, but are not more than about 25 years old. This year, we are targeting organizations who serve children, youth, and families. We have found in running GRIT that it's often more beneficial, both in terms of not-for-profit bonding and everyone rowing in the same direction, to serve similar constituents and have a similar mission. We did not adhere to that particular approach in our early years. We got a lot of feedback that it felt like a one-room schoolhouse. So we're trying to have, groups have a certain mission in common. But I think it casts a fairly wide net to say children and families. We are looking for groups where the preponderance of their revenues is from the public sector, because if you're already getting a lot of foundation money, these workshops will probably not be optimally useful to you, because you've already nailed, part of the raison d'etre of this series. And we're looking for groups that have some experience with evaluation, because we do spend some time talking about extrapolating results. So a group has to have some way of collecting and tracking information about their constituents. They don't need to have a very sophisticated system, but they need to have some sense of what kind of strides and progress their clients have made.
Yeah. About how many are you looking to see in this cohort?
Our cohorts have been between 10 and 15 people. We usually have 50 people in the room, because we have each group bring several members of their leadership team as well as a board member. So we have, so 3 or 4 people can attend each workshop. And I expect that we'll have about a dozen to 15 groups.
Yeah. Are you seeing a more increased, desire on the part of organizations, given the fact that we are in this well, I don't want to say yeah, we want to say post-COVID,
Yes.
COVID environment. Yeah, I don't know how to technically define it. I mean, we're getting, it seems as though the worst is over. We'll say it like that, but still, it's a COVID environment. But, moving out of that, talk to us about that.
I would imagine that we will have several dozen applicants. In the past, we've had anywhere between probably 50 and 100 candidates submit applications. We're not trying to make this as hard to get into as Harvard, at all. We're hoping to pick a dozen groups that we think will benefit optimally from this. We expect that we'll have to make some very hard decisions, but again, we're trying to identify groups that are needy, not groups that are rock stars that are already raising a lot of money, and want to get an incremental benefit. So we tend to look at groups that are, have a good idea and a committed staff, but maybe slightly weaker in terms of securing foundation support.
So somebody's watching right now and says, listen, this sounds like something I really want to pursue after or look into. What advice do you give them?
I would tell them to look at our website, which has a little more information about GRIT and where the application rests. And to complete it, we launched the application long before the deadline. That's in 6 weeks from now. We intend to actually talk to each applicant, and have a phone call or a Zoom convening with them and make decisions in September and then launch the program in October. It will run for 6 weeks. We will meet twice a week in the mornings, and we'll conclude by Thanksgiving. We'll conclude the class part by Thanksgiving. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be an opportunity to have one-on-one sessions with workshop leaders through the rest of the year and possibly into the winter quarter if people can't schedule, immediately, because we want to be very generous and flexible in terms of that element of the program.
Yeah. And for you, I know having an opportunity to work with organizations and see them go through this cohort. You spoke a little bit earlier about how you have been able to see organizations increase funding. Is there any particular organization that comes to mind that maybe you want to highlight and say was a great success story for you?
All of these groups are my favorites, and I really hate to call one out in particular.
You won't get in trouble. You won't get in trouble.
I'm going to say that Emma's Torch, which participated in the program about 3 years ago, is an organization that probably moved light years from where they were when they first came to Robin Hood. They were just past their startup phase. They are a job training program in the food industry. They struggled to articulate their model, and they were not really clear about their costs, because all of their expenses, everything from teaching to food to internship stipends, were all mushed together, and they were not able to crystallize each element of the program. And they weren't really tracking where all of their alums went. They knew that a lot of people were getting jobs. And in fact, they were helping with job placement, but they weren't quantifying the proportion of successes to each class. So if you're training 50 people and 45 of them get jobs, that's an A, that's a 90% success rate. They weren't really presenting things like that. They were more saying, oh, 3 people went to classy restaurants and 10 of them went to family restaurants. And so it's a group that made enormous strides in talking about costs and evaluation. And they survived the pandemic beautifully. They started a revenue generating project in Brooklyn. They sold food at the public library at Grand Army Plaza for 2 years. They they really nailed it. And I like for Grit to take some credit for that.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you for coming and sharing about what's going on with Robinhood. Great work and great opportunities for organizations to really level up and be able to take it to the next level. Suzi, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to talk about this. It's incredibly gratifying, and I appreciate the invite to speak to you.
Great. Best wishes to you and best wishes to Robinhood. Listen, got to take a quick break here on this show. Why don't you stay with us because we got another special guest coming up right after this.